In the small French town of Helleringen, on December 16, 1944, Staff Sergeant Frank Lembo of Company B, 305th Engineer Combat Battalion, sat down to write to his fiancée, Betty Craig. It was an ordinary evening, the kind of quiet moments soldiers treasured between campaigns. His letter was filled with simple, human details: a battalion show the night before featuring Red Cross girls serving donuts, the laughter of a division band, an upcoming dance, and the endless, familiar chores of Army life: laundry, maintenance, and waiting. At that moment, the 80th Infantry Division, the Blue Ridge Division, believed it was entering a period of rest and reserve. The front lines were elsewhere. The war seemed to be inching toward its end. None of them yet knew that, just hours earlier, German forces had launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, the massive counteroffensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Within days, Frank Lembo's peaceful interlude would dissolve into chaos. It would be 9 days before he wrote Betty again, the longest gap in their correspondence during his 3 years in uniform. During that silence, his division's fate would pivot dramatically. A sudden turn north. Initially, the 80th Division had been poised for an attack into Germany. Orders had already been issued. But as reports of the German breakthrough flooded in, General George S. Patton's Third Army was abruptly redirected. His forces were ordered to swing north, a massive maneuver that required speed, precision, and endurance across treacherous winter terrain. In the biting cold of mid-December, the 80th began a grueling 150-mile redeployment over frozen, congested roads. The men crossed from France into Luxembourg, advancing toward a front that was collapsing under the weight of the German onslaught. For the engineers like Lembo, this was no simple move. There were no detailed maps, and German rearguard units had filled the routes with traps and obstructions. Trees had been felled across roads, bridges were mined or destroyed, crossroads were littered with debris. The engineers led the way, clearing paths for the infantry and armor, cutting, digging, detonating, and rebuilding mile by mile. First Lieutenant Walter Carr, Deputy Commander of Company E, 318th Infantry Regiment, later described the movement in his memoirs. With headlights blazing for the first time since I had joined the 80th Division in September 1944, we traveled all night. Early the next morning, as we passed through the outskirts of Luxembourg City, many of its residents lined the highway and cheered. We hoped that meant the war was over. North of the city, we got jerked back to reality when we met a steady stream of refugees fleeing south to escape the Germans. The 80th Division was now part of Patton's hastily formed 3-Corps strike force alongside the 26th Infantry Division and the 4th Armored Division. Their mission, to break through German lines and relieve the surrounded 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne, Belgium, a critical road junction under siege. Into the maelstrom. On December 22, 1944, as snow and sleet blanketed the Ardennes, the 3 divisions went into action. The 4th Armored was to spearhead the drive toward Bastogne. The 26th Infantry Division attacked westward, and the 80th was ordered to seize the town of Ettelbruck, a key German supply hub southeast of Bastogne. Progress was agonizingly slow. The frozen roads, the deep snow, and the fierce German resistance turned every mile into a battle. From inside Bastogne, surrounded and cut off, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, grew impatient. "I was disappointed I did not get to shake hands with you today," he quipped on December 23rd, and a weary staff officer added with black humor, "A reminder, there is only one shopping day before Christmas." But the Blue Ridge Division pressed on. Its engineers fought not only the enemy but the landscape itself, clearing mines, building makeshift bridges, and carving paths through snow-clogged forests. The road to Bastogne was littered with wreckage and frozen corpses. Yet still they advanced. By Christmas Eve, Major General Horace L. McBride, commander of the 80th Division, received orders to detach 2 battalions, including Carr's Company E of the 318th Regiment, to reinforce the 4th Armored Division's final push toward Bastogne. Frank Lembo's engineer platoon was attached as the road-clearing element. The 44 engineers under Lembo's direction would bear the responsibility of keeping the lifeline open, a task as critical as any rifle or tank. The race for Bastogne had begun. The order came on Christmas Eve, 1944. Major General John Milliken, commander of 3 Corps, instructed Major General Horace McBride to release 2 battalions from the 80th Blue Ridge Division to reinforce the 4th Armored's assault toward Bastogne. Among them was 1st Lieutenant Walter Carr's Company E of the 318th Infantry Regiment and a platoon of engineers under Staff Sergeant Frank Lembo. Their task was both simple and perilous: clear the roads of mines, debris, and wreckage to keep the advance moving. It was a job performed in freezing darkness, under threat from artillery and air attack, and with the knowledge that a single misstep could mean obliteration. Lembo commanded one of 3 engineer sections, each responsible for a stretch of the route. Their mission was essential. Patton's tanks could not move without them. A Christmas Eve convoy. The infantrymen of the 318th boarded trucks that wound through the snow-covered hills of Luxembourg. Their route was circuitous, designed to skirt known German positions. The convoy crept forward through narrow roads glazed with ice, headlights dimmed, stopping frequently to ask for directions from locals and military police. Lieutenant Carr later recalled, "When the convoy passed through Ardennes, we were surprised to see the city lit with Christmas lights and its citizens doing their last-minute Christmas shopping. It was the first time in Europe we had seen people engaged in normal life. The decorations made some of us very homesick, and we wondered if we would live to see decorations at home during later Christmas seasons. Too many wouldn't." From Niederfeuillen, Luxembourg, to Bern, Belgium, roughly 35 miles, the journey took 6 bone-chilling hours. Snow whipped across the windshields, engines sputtered in the cold, and men huddled under blankets for warmth. They reached Bern after midnight, exhausted and numb. The town marked the northernmost position held by the 4th Armored Division. Tanks had already pushed forward toward Chaumont, only to be driven back by German tank destroyers armed with the deadly 88mm guns. The situation was tense and uncertain. The infantrymen sought barns and basements for a few hours of rest. The engineers, however, had no such luxury. Lembo's men immediately began surveying the roads north, probing for mines and checking for obstructions. Every mile cleared brought them closer to the besieged paratroopers in Bastogne. A soldier's Christmas. That same night, Frank Lembo found a brief moment to write home. "I'm rather tired today," he confessed to Betty Craig. "Didn't get to bed until 5 a.m., business stuff, and was up at 8:30. The past week has been jam-packed with things to write about, but until a future date it will have to be kept here." He knew the censorship rules by heart. Not a single one of his 86 wartime letters bore a censor's mark. He was careful, but his words hinted at the chaos around him. There's fighting going on, and over the next hill they are slamming away at each other. Still, he allowed himself a lighter note. "We've seen some good dogfights, and yesterday I saw a Rhein plane take a nosedive." For soldiers who live day to day under threat of shell fire, even watching an enemy aircraft fall from the sky offered a fleeting sense of justice. Into Chaumont. On Christmas Day, the 80th's 2nd Battalion, already reduced to about 350 men, scarcely 1/3 of full strength, attacked the village of Chaumont. It was a small, nondescript Belgian hamlet, but tactically vital. Whoever held Chaumont controlled the corridor leading toward Bastogne. The fighting was savage. Companies F and G seized the high ground east of the village, while Carr's Company East fought its way street by street through the town itself. Shells tore apart stone walls, houses caught fire, and machine guns rattled through the snow-choked lanes. Carr remembered. The struggle for Chaumont brought tragedy not only to Americans attacking the village, but also to its Belgian residents. "How well I remember an elderly, heartbroken couple who huddled in their small basement where some of us had taken shelter Christmas night. A fighter-bomber attack had wrecked everything they owned." By the end of Christmas Day, Chaumont was in ruins. The village had changed hands 4 times since December 16th. For the men of the 80th, there was no Christmas dinner, only the bitter satisfaction of surviving another day, fighting for Grandreux and beyond. The next morning, the Americans moved on Grandreux, a nearby village. After a heavy bombardment, we ventilated buildings with 57mm, read one after-action report. The infantry pushed forward. Resistance was fierce, and by the time the smoke cleared, Company F was down to just 25 men. The Germans still held pockets of woodland outside the village. Lieutenant Edmund A. Wellinghoff, Company E's new commander, radioed for tank support to root out a group of entrenched German soldiers. When the tank arrived, Wellinghoff stood exposed beside it, using the external phone to coordinate the attack, a bold act that could easily have gotten him killed. Carr described the moment vividly. The Germans could have picked him off easily. But they didn't. They feared the tank commander would kill them rather than let them surrender to us. When the tank opened fire, the German position collapsed. The surviving defenders quickly surrendered, terrified not of the riflemen, but of the armored beast looming over them. With the woods cleared, Company E advanced to occupy Hompré, a small Belgian village south of Bastogne. The men dug in for the night, cold, filthy, and hollow-eyed. For some, it was the first roof they had slept under in a week. As the snow fell softly outside, Lieutenant Carr received a summons to battalion headquarters. There he was given an assignment that would test every ounce of his courage and skill, a mission so dangerous that he believed he would not return alive. It would become one of the most daring reconnaissance patrols of the entire Battle of the Bulge. By the night of December 26, 1944, the 4th Armored Division had finally punched a narrow corridor through to Bastogne. Tanks under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams reached the edge of the besieged city, linking up with the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division, who had been surrounded for a week. The link-up was only partial, however. The supply route through Assenois remained under constant enemy fire. Much of the surrounding terrain was still in German hands, and the front lines were confused and fragmented. Units that had been advancing from different directions were now converging in deep snow and darkness, and no one was quite sure where friend ended and foe began. For the 80th Division, that uncertainty was deadly. Their next advance risked colliding with the 101st itself. The situation demanded clarity and a reconnaissance mission to make contact with the defenders of Bastogne. That mission fell to First Lieutenant Walter Carr. Orders in the snow. Carr remembered receiving his orders in a dimly lit room at battalion headquarters in Hompré. "Carr, we've selected you to lead a crucial patrol," Captain P.W. Foreman, our operations officer, told me. "Right now we're about 3 miles south of Bastogne. After several more days of fighting, we expect to contact the 101st Airborne. We need to know exactly where their defensive positions are so we won't shoot each other up when we try to make contact." Foreman's expression was grim. "We want you to take a patrol into Bastogne tonight to bring back information on the positions of the 101st. But you'll have to be careful. We know you'll have a tough time getting through to the 101st and back. But you've accomplished tough assignments before." Carr wasn't chosen by chance. Months earlier, he had successfully crossed the Seal River to capture a German prisoner under cover of darkness, earning a reputation as the battalion's night patrol specialist. It was a skill that came with a cost. "I wasn't totally happy with this assignment," Carr admitted later, "but I probably did get some perks from it." Choosing the men. The lieutenant walked back through the snow to his company, the cold biting at his face as he considered the task ahead. The patrol would have to move through German lines, slip past enemy troops encircling Bastogne, make contact with the 101st, then retrace the route back before dawn, all within 10 hours. He decided on a 4-man patrol, small enough to move silently, but large enough to provide security in all directions. They would travel in a diamond formation, 1 man forward, 1 rear, 1 right, 1 left, with Carr himself at the rear, ready to assume command if anyone was lost or captured. At Sergeant Virgil Miller's platoon, Carr made a grim discovery. Every man he had known there a month earlier, 40 in all, had been killed or wounded in the fighting. The news hit him hard, but Miller, a calm and capable leader from Elyria, Ohio, volunteered to accompany him. Carr immediately accepted. Miller then selected the other 2 men, Private Eddie Martinez of Houston, Texas, and Private First Class Mulford E. Jones of Sarepta, Mississippi. For men, a lieutenant, a sergeant, and 2 privates would walk into the darkness that night. Carr gathered them around a map spread on a wooden table. "If anything happens to me," he told them quietly, "you carry on. I'll be at the rear where I can direct you. Keep me in sight. No talking. Use hand signals only. If we get tangled with the Germans, whoever survives continues the mission." Each man nodded. They checked their weapons and equipment one last time, tightened their overcoats, and stepped out into the blinding white of a moonlit snowfield. Across the frozen fields. Carr later described the scene. "The snow made the night so bright we felt very conspicuous. We were crossing a huge expanse of open terrain, and every step seemed to echo in the silence. I was sure this would be the last night of my life." After about a mile, the patrol spotted a dark cluster of buildings to the left, a village. Carr believed it to be Assenois, but he needed confirmation. Taking the lead, he crept forward alone, whispering the few words of French he knew in case he encountered civilians. Suddenly, a voice shouted from the darkness, "Halt!" The patrol froze. Then came another sound. The word had been spoken with an American accent. Relief washed over them. The sentry, a weary rifleman from the 4th Armored Division, pointed them toward a nearby house. Inside, Carr found the company commander. "You're in luck," the officer told him. We're about to send a column of tanks and armored carriers into Bastogne. We may hit resistance, but you can ride with us. You'll get in and out faster that way." For Carr's men, it was an unexpected reprieve. They climbed into the back of an M3 armored personnel carrier, grateful for its thin metal walls against the biting wind. Into Bastogne. The column rumbled forward, stopping only once when the lead tanks had to shoot our way through the Germans, as Carr put it. Then, as dawn approached, they rolled into the bombed-out outskirts of Bastogne. Inside the city, Carr and his men were led to the headquarters of the 101st Airborne Division. The atmosphere was surreal, weary paratroopers in muddy foxholes, the acrid smell of burning buildings, and the constant drone of artillery in the distance. Carr explained his mission to Colonel William Kinnard, the division's operations officer. Kinnard handed him a mimeograph sketch map showing the 101 ST's perimeter defenses. "I was surprised he gave me the sketch," Carr wrote later. "He might have been more reluctant if I had been returning on foot instead of by armored carrier." Carr folded the map and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "If anything happens to me," he told the men, "whoever survives takes the map and brings it back." The patrol joined the outbound convoy and began the return journey south. At Assenois, they dismounted and trudged on foot across the frozen fields toward Hompré. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of snow and the distant rumble of artillery. As they neared their own lines, Carr grew anxious. Their silhouettes in the snow could easily be mistaken for Germans. But luck held. They slipped through without a shot fired. When he stepped back into battalion headquarters, the men stared in disbelief. "Captain Foreman," someone said, "it's Lieutenant Carr. He's back." I unbuttoned my jacket, pulled out the map, and said, "Here it is, exactly what you ordered." Foreman could hardly believe it. Carr had done the impossible, infiltrated enemy lines, reached Bastogne, and returned with vital intelligence, all in a single night. The link-up. The next morning, December 28th, the 2nd Battalion of the 318th Regiment advanced again, finally linking up with the Bastogne defenders. The siege was over. The Blue Ridge Division's long, freezing march had achieved its goal. The cost, however, had been steep. Of the 21 trucks that had carried the men to Belgium, only 9 were needed for the return. The link-up between the 80th Infantry Division, 4th Armored Division, and the 101st Airborne on December 28, 1944, marked the symbolic end of the siege of Bastogne. Snow still blanketed the fields, the air stank of diesel and cordite, and the groan of wounded tanks echoed through the frozen valleys of Belgium. But for the first time in 10 days, the American flag flew freely over Bastogne. For the men who had fought their way there, the relief brought neither triumph nor celebration, only exhaustion. Exhaustion and reflection. The 2nd Battalion of the 318th Infantry Regiment, which had started the offensive with more than 700 men, now counted fewer than 200. Company F, once 150 strong, mustered only 25 soldiers. Those who remained were frostbitten, sleepless, and numb. As the smoke cleared, they were finally rotated off the front lines. Companies E and G received new uniforms and warm quarters. F Company, the hardest hit, was assigned to outpost duty near Assenois, covering the fragile supply route. Later that day, the survivors sat down to their first real meal in weeks, a belated Christmas dinner in Bastogne itself. The turkey was cold, the coffee weak, but there was plenty of it. Since rations had been drawn for 350 men, one after-action report noted dryly, there was ample food for all. In the midst of this brief calm, Staff Sergeant Frank Lembo managed to write to Betty Craig again. "We've been away from our company," he began, "and today we are having a late meal. We're up here with some infantry and armor, or in other words, we're orphans again. The battle that was going on Christmas Day is still going on in increasing fury. I guess something has got to give soon, and I doubt it will be us." Lembo's letters, once filled with warmth and humor, had grown darker. The endless cold, the strain of command, and the loss of friends had stripped away his optimism. "I'm pretty darn disgusted with everything over here," he confessed a few days later. "We fight like heck, and then someone screws up and Heine sets us for a loop. At home no one seems to care, and here we beat our heads for nothing." Then came an even bleaker line, one that captured the mood of an entire army worn thin by war. "From the looks of things, we'll have to fight our way right to Berlin, and I hope we burn that path soon. We all thought this war was over, and I guess the only way to get it over with is to destroy Germany, her soldiers, her civilians, and the ground they live on. A needed rest. After Bastogne, the 80th Division was pulled back into reserve status. Their commanders understood what the men had endured, weeks of near-continuous combat, bitter cold, and the psychological toll of seeing so many comrades fall. Lieutenant Walter Carr later summarized the state of the unit. As survivors of the Bastogne combat action, we were too psychologically battered to be in the front lines. We needed rest if we were to carry out our next assignment successfully. We had gone to Belgium in 21 trucks, but needed only 9 to return. In the new year, the Blue Ridge Division regrouped in Luxembourg, where engineers and infantry alike were finally given days off to rest and recover. Frank Lembo wrote home on January 1, 1945, describing a rare moment of normalcy. Today was a simple GI day for us here. We finished a bridge we started yesterday, and late in the afternoon, we had a turkey dinner. The routine work of engineering, repairing bridges, clearing roads, rebuilding what the fighting had destroyed, was a kind of therapy. For men who had spent weeks tearing things down, it felt good to build again. Looking back, perhaps it was the memory of Bastogne still fresh in his mind that led Lembo to a more reflective mood in the first days of the new year. On January 2nd, he wrote to Betty once more, a letter that reads today like the weary summation of a soldier's journey. I was just thinking about that last day together we had, and how perfect it was, and how long away I've come since then. I can remember that boat ride to England, our trip across the Channel, going into action and suffering 1,000 deaths when we heard our first artillery shell, the mad dash across France, the wine, the flowers, the ripe tomatoes and eggs, the storming of our first river, and the fighting beyond, Christmas in Belgium, New Year in Luxembourg. He paused, as if realizing how much had changed. Yes, we've come a long way. We're a little tired, a little older, and a little bitter. We fight hoping each battle is the last one, with thoughts of going home and enjoying a peaceful life. Our thoughts run to our sweethearts who we long for, each letter being a 5-minute furlough with the one you love. The war beyond Bastogne. The victory at Bastogne did not end the war. For another month, the Battle of the Bulge raged on as American and Allied forces clawed back the ground lost to Hitler's winter offensive. In February, the 80th Division faced one of its hardest tests, the bloody crossing of the Our River, under fire from entrenched German defenders. But the tide had turned. The German army's failure in the Ardennes had drained its strength, consuming men, tanks, and fuel it could never replace. By spring, the Blue Ridge Division was marching into Germany itself, liberating towns and prison camps filled with Allied POWs. The final irony was clear. Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes, meant to divide the Allies and prolong the war, had instead hastened his defeat. Epilogue. For men like Frank Lembo and Walter Carr, Bastogne would always mark a turning point, not just in the war but in their own lives. They had faced the worst winter in Europe's modern memory, marched through ice and fear, and somehow survived. When the snow finally melted and the roads ran clear again, the men of the 80th Infantry Division carried on, tired, older, wiser, and forever changed. What came after? The Battle of the Bulge ended officially on January 28, 1945, but for the men of the 80th Infantry Division, the war continued for months. The Blue Ridge soldiers pressed eastward through Luxembourg and into Germany, crossing the Sauer River in one of their bloodiest operations, then advancing across the Moselle and Rhine on their final march toward victory. In April, they reached Buchenwald, one of the largest Nazi concentration camps, and liberated its surviving prisoners. For many, that moment, confronting the full horror of what they had been fighting against, brought a clarity that battle itself never could. Staff Sergeant Frank Lembo. Frank Lembo remained with the 305th Engineer Combat Battalion through the end of the war. His letters to Betty Craig continued, a steady thread through the chaos of Europe's final months. In them, his tone softened once the fighting eased, but the war had marked him deeply. Like so many others, Frank returned home in late 1945, older by far than his 20-something years. He married Betty soon after his discharge and built a quiet post-war life in upstate New York. Friends recalled his humor and patience, qualities that had steadied his men under fire, though he rarely spoke about Bastogne. His wartime letters, carefully saved by Betty, remain among the most vivid personal records of an engineer's life on the Western Front. Lieutenant Walter Carr. Walter Carr, who led the daring patrol to Bastogne, stayed in the Army until the war's end. His reconnaissance work earned him the Silver Star for gallantry, an award he accepted with modest disbelief. In his memoirs, Carr wrote that the true heroes were the men who never came back from the snow. After the war, Carr returned to his hometown of Hot Springs, Arkansas, became a teacher, and later a school principal. He continued to write, publishing recollections of the 80th Division's campaign that preserved the memory of his comrades long after the guns fell silent. He died in 1996, remembered by his former students not as a war hero, but as a quiet man who taught the value of perseverance and integrity. The 80th Blue Ridge Division. The 80th Infantry Division served with distinction from Normandy to the end of the war, fighting across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Between August 1944 and May 1945, the division spent 289 days in combat, among the longest of any U.S. unit in the European theater. Its soldiers earned 6 distinguished unit citations, 11,000 Purple Hearts, and the respect of both comrades and commanders. When the war ended, the division had liberated thousands of civilians and prisoners, bridged countless rivers, and paid a heavy price, over 17,000 casualties, including more than 3,000 dead. Today, the 80th Training Command carries the division's lineage, its patch, 3 Blue Mountain peaks, still worn proudly by new generations of U.S. Army soldiers. Legacy. The relief of Bastogne remains one of the defining moments of the 80th's story. While the 4th Armored Division received the headlines for breaking the siege, the men of the Blue Ridge played a vital supporting role, carving the roads, clearing the way, and holding the flanks that made the breakthrough possible. History often overlooks those details. But in the cold nights of December 1944, when the snow glowed white under artillery flashes, it was men like Frank Lembo and Walter Carr who ensured the road to Bastogne stayed open. Their courage did not just help save the city. It helped turn the tide of the war.